How did that process start to happen and unfold?
For me, it was very clear from the beginning I wanted to be a writer.
The fact that you decided that you want to create Indian content for Indian kids by an Indian author, contextualized in India,
Yes.
Where did you start?
My choice of reading was very eclectic. And in some cases, it really helped me expand my mind, and in some cases, it taught me that maybe this kind of book you don't want to read. British children had the best childhoods. In my childhood sucked.
Did that change you in some way?
Okay, and realized that it wasn't always sunny there. It was such a switch for me in my head, it was like somebody took a mirror and showed me what a glorious and charmed life I was leading. Basically, you're good or bad, not because you're evil or excellent, but because of the choices you make. Let's do a series. The porcupine running helter-skelter looking for shelter, and the world is really small. That doesn't matter where the story comes from. An engaging story is an engaging story, and it will capture, if it can capture a child's imagination, you have it.
I have been hearing about you actually from the beginning of my career, which was approximately 20 years ago.
That's crazy. How? How?
So I used to work with a magazine called Travel and Leisure back in the day. And my manager and the editor of the magazine, Payal Kohli.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Payal is an old friend.
Okay. So she used to mention you a lot. And I remember every time there was content in and around Bangalore, it was like, oh, we'll just get Roopa Pai and Roopa will take care of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, we were colleagues. Actually, for both of us, our first jobs were with Target magazine, but we can talk about that a little later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've known her for almost 30 years now. More than 30 years. Yeah. Wow. Yes.
No, wonderful. And it was great to work with Payal because I, as a, restless and stupid young person, really learned a lot, which maybe I processed later.
Yeah.
But it was amazing.
Nice, nice. Just the world is really small. That's all I can say.
Yeah. But you are a proper, true blue Bangalorean, right?
Yes.
That's the short answer to where you're from, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Third generation Bangalorean.
Okay.
As I like to say these days, when claims for Bangalore becomes,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And that's rare, right? Like
that is
a lot
not
of
as
us
rare as we imagine, but yeah, it's a very small percentage. Yeah.
Okay. But now I feel like the idea of what a Bangalorean is has become so fluid and so kind of redefined. Like I call myself a Bangalorean and I've been here for 10 years.
Yeah.
Which is also a long time compared to
Yes.
people who've
Yes.
moved in like far more recently.
Yeah.
But what is that idea of being a Bangalorean for you?
I think being a Bangalorean is like being a Delhiite or a Mumbaiker or whatever. It's about whether your rhythms, your own personal rhythms, resonate with that of the city. And I think every city has quite a different rhythm from every other city. So if you find yourself in tune with Bangalore, it's not about how long you have lived here, really. Because there are people who have lived here for very long who still migrate to, not so many, I must say. People who are from here rarely go elsewhere, but...
So you started writing at a very young age, am I right?
Well, for my own self, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Was it a reading habit that led you to write, or how did this whole thing unfold in your life?
I am not quite sure. Of course, I read like a maniac. I was reading all the time. I was like your archetypal bookworm with my nose in a book all the time. And when I ran out of books to read, I would be reading detergent packets, toothpaste packets, borrowing. I went to SSLC, which is the state board. That's what I studied. But I would go and borrow people who were doing ICSE and CBSE, their English textbooks, read those stories and all of that. But now that I think back on it, and now having lived a full life as a writer, I know that just because you read doesn't make you a writer. It's a different impulse that makes you want to record the things you are experiencing, seeing, feeling by writing about it. People record it by they take photographs, they take videos, they record it in their minds as something. But my impulse was always to write things down. Although I never kept a diary or anything, it wasn't a disciplined, formal kind of thing. But if I had experienced something, a lovely trip to the forest, and when I saw by chance you came across an animal, there was one, my dad used to always remember this, I must have been, 10 or something. We went to Nagarhole, And we didn't see that many animals. And, we used to have those old cars and very untrustworthy, unreliable cars. They could break down any time. And it had gotten dark on our way back, and we were like, a bit scared. And then an animal ran into the headlights. And it was a porcupine. And it stood there, so totally paralyzed by the lights with its spikes all out. And for me, it led some kind of profound empathy for the animal, the poor animal. And we have been scared sitting in this forest, whether we'll get out in time, and look at this animal, poor thing. In its interaction with humans, it is so terrified. So that kind of thing I would come back and write about. And my dad used to quote some phrase from that early thing. Apparently I wrote, the porcupine running helter-skelter looking for shelter. And he was like, oh, so anyway, this impulse was always there to write things down. So, and I think I'm very lucky that I knew when I was very young what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do with my life. Even people who just write, record their feelings, don't always think that they want to be writers. But for me, it was very clear from the beginning, I wanted to be a writer. So just lucky.
And how was your relationship with books evolving as you also became a young writer? I mean, writing for yourself is being a writer, right? How did that relationship kind of work itself out?
I mean, I just read a lot, felt a lot, distilled a lot. I was quite, my choice of reading was very eclectic, which I tell children now that I meet that, of course, you're a reader and a great reader if you, I've read all the Harry Potters, I've read all the Percy Jacksons, that's good. But that's kind of genre reading. So try to expand your horizon, read other things. For me, what worked in my favor is I grew up in a time when parents didn't keep such a close watch on what you were reading or what you were doing. You just please stay out of the way and do your thing and be quiet and entertain yourself. I'm not here to entertain you kind of age. So my dad's bookshelf, my grandparents' bookshelf, they were not particularly age-appropriate books, many of them.
Right.
But I got to read a lot of stuff that I knew wasn't meant for me. And in some cases, it really helped me expand my mind. And in some cases, it taught me that maybe this kind of book you don't want to read. So then that gave me a sort of clarity on what kinds of books I wanted to write. And that's how. So my first big love was Enid Blyton.
Yeah.
Because she just wrote so many books. She wrote 700 titles or something in her lifetime. She was a crazily prolific writer. She used to write 10,000 words a day, apparently.
Wow.
On a good day. So things like that. So, and luckily for me, or I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, those were the books that we had most access to as children in the 70s and 80s. Circulating libraries were our source of, access to books. And all circulating libraries had tons of Enid Blyton books. And the good part was that, she wrote so many books that through a summer vacation, you could go from one end of the bookshelf to the other and then come back, because by the time you reached that, next year you'd have forgotten what you read here.
Wow.
Plus, I went to a school that believed in giving books as prizes for any kind of achievement, not trophies. And so that introduced me to a whole range of other authors children's authors that I may not have been able to access otherwise.
Such as?
Such as, there was this book called Little Lord Fauntleroy. I can't even remember who wrote it, but I loved that book. That was a prize book. Then there was Heidi by Johanna Spyri. So
beautiful.
That I was not on my bookshelf, and it wasn't in circulating libraries, those kinds of books.
Yeah.
And then there was Gone with the Wind, those kinds, and To Kill a Mockingbird, one of my most favorite books of all time, really, really had a big influence on me as a children's writer. Yeah, and then there was another entire set of books that I read growing up, which were Russian books. Yeah. Very strange. That was like one blip in time, like a little... a few, maybe 15, 20 years.
Like folk tales, right? Russian folk tales, short stories.
Not just, all kinds of books. And they came to us from the Soviet Union because India and the Soviet Union had such a close relationship. And they were cheap, very cheap. In Bangalore, there was a publisher called Navakarnataka Publications who used to distribute those books. And they would be beautifully produced, large format, lovely illustrations, and there'd be books, stories by some of the greatest Russian writers. There were Chekhov's short stories for children and Tolstoy. So great literature came to us via children's stories.
Yeah.
And some of them, there's one called The Three Fat Men, which was a fat novel about communism and, all that. And you just absorbed, you just kept reading all kinds of things with no filter at all. And you ended up growing up. And that's why I say that, it doesn't matter where the story comes from. An engaging story is an engaging story, and it will capture, if it can capture a child's imagination, you have it. So I think so there were all these influences. And what about Indian writing? What about my Indian influences? So there wasn't enough English writing in English, contemporary writing in English for children at that time at all. And I think it's not the Indian way to write separate stories for children. It's just not traditionally anyway. So the Mahabharata itself would be told to children in a different way, or the Ramayana. There was no set of genre of stories for children. I think that itself is a slightly Western concept.
That's very true.
So I did Amarchitra Katha, and they blew my mind. I just loved Amarchitra Katha. Like so many reading kids of my generation, we waited for the next comic to come out, the next one, and we was totally immersed in it, loved it. The illustrations were fantastic. And one thing I want to say about Amarchitra Katha, there was never a single typo. I don't know, other things, Chandamama and all, not so reliable. Something could be there. But Amarchitra Katha was perfect. Perfect grammar, punctuation, the editing was amazing. So, really enjoyed reading those books. However, all of them spoke about a different time, a storied past, and the fantastical, beautiful stories. I loved, and they made me fall in love with Indian mythology. I still love Indian mythology, but no representation for a young Indian urban child like me reading in English. I never read any Indian books that had characters like me in them.
Right, that you could relate to.
That reflected my life, my reality. There wasn't.
Right.
So so that was how it went on until I was about 13 or something. I came late to this magazine called Target, which was brought out by India Today, and Target was like a leap, quantum leap away from other Indian children's magazines or books that I had read, because it was smart, it was sassy, and it carried stories from the best Indian writers of the day writing for Indian children. And they all carried stories that reflected my reality. There were young girls in them who had exactly my kind of life, who were surrounded by adults who lived in large families, things like that. Because the Enid Blyton children lived a very different life from mine. They were completely unsupervised. They were always roaming, no adult supervision. They were doing things entirely on their own. They were rowing to islands on their own. They were having adventures. They were catching smugglers. And they were having the most marvelous picnics. And they were doing it all entirely by themselves. And my reality was very different. I was surrounded by adults and family. Everybody had a say in what I wore and who I went to meet. It was so curated, I felt, my experiences, that I naturally, revolted against it. And I felt that British children had the best childhoods. In my childhood sucked. So because
and what about the contrast in the food that they ate?
My
right?
God.
Like you mentioned the scones and the lemonade. How come I'm not eating these things?
Yeah, the food. Enid Blyton wrote so beautifully about. See, she taught me a lot about how to be a good children's writer. Unconsciously, I absorbed it. Because the plot was always crackling, the dialogue was fantastic, the pace kept moving, there was action all the time. And she even taught us readers how to be a good person without being preachy about it.
Okay, such as?
In those, if you're greedy, this will, like karma actually.
Right.
If you're greedy, this will happen to you, and if you steal, this will happen. Without making it, the stories were so engaging, you never thought it was a moral story.
Right.
But there was always some kind of, the sort of not so good person would get his comeuppance at some point in the story. So for some time they had a good time, and then they would be, they would get their penalty of some kind. So, but she wrote amazingly about food. Everything was so exciting. They used to always, the famous five, for instance, they would they would be going off on the bicycle somewhere, and they'd stop by a farm, and the farmer's wife would give them some fresh eggs, and they would be camping in the countryside, and milk, and then there would be Joanna the cook would give them a big wedge of gingerbread to take away with them. So everything was, and scones of course, and clotted cream and strawberry jam. And who knew what scones were? No idea.
Exactly.
Yeah. And children were constantly eating out of cans. Okay, ham and tongue, cold supper, cold sandwiches. And now that I think about it, now that I know what those cold sandwiches are like, why was I salivating about this kind of food? And I was South Indian vegetarian child. I couldn't have eaten any of that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense of the way I had been brought up.
Yeah.
Afterwards, of course, I remained vegetarian, but that's entirely by choice, not because I don't approve of non-veg or anything. I just don't like it. So anyway, she wrote so engagingly about food, and my picnics were tons of family, cousins. We always went either to Lal Bagh or Cubbon Park, very rarely somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then the adults would, play badminton and cards and have a siesta after lunch and all that. And when the food came out, it would be steel dabbas of chitrana, mosrana, like lemon rice and curd rice, and chips, because it was a special thing, and maybe some sweets. But I was like, man, this is not life. I should be eating that kind of food. And that continued until eventually, like I was saying, I came across Target magazine, and I found stories that talked about my life. Other children there also in those stories were eating regular aloo parathas and everything, but they seemed to be having a marvelous time. And it was such a switch for me in my head, it was like somebody took a mirror and showed me what a glorious and charmed life I was leading.
Right.
And then I felt, that taught me also the power of storytelling. The way in it, any good story writer, good storyteller could convince you that, what they were talking about was the best thing. If you didn't have enough of a rooting in your own, you could get swept away by stories from other cultures, other realities. So Target showed me that, and that's when I thought to myself that I want to be a writer of Indian stories for Indian children. So Target really blew my mind open.
And how did that process start to happen and unfold? The fact that you decided that you want to create Indian content for Indian kids by an Indian author, contextualized in India, where did you start?
So my first big thing was that I wanted to work for Target magazine. That became the goal of my life. I want to write these stories, but where would I write them? And before that, but when I was in college and stuff, I started writing these little middles. They're called middles because they come on the op-ed page. The middle double spread of the newspaper, of Deccan Herald, was our newspaper in Bangalore at that time. And these middles used to be like very short, maybe 350, 400 words, slice of life, something that happened, and I still enjoy reading them because, again, they were reflecting my reality. They were not written by very young people, not 17-year-olds. They were written by slightly older people and mostly reminiscing or nostalgia or something like that. But I started writing those stories about my family and my life and India, and after some 4 or 5 tries, one got accepted, it got printed. I was in college, I was in 11th or 12th. And, it was such a high because Deccan Herald was the only newspaper in Bangalore at that time. So the phone was ringing off the hook. My mom was receiving calls. Oh, we saw Roopa's article in the paper. So that became my thing. I began to write those. And I began to become very comfortable in writing these Indian kinds of, write about what you know is one of the rules of writing. So, look around you and write about this. Why? Don't write derivative stuff about stuff you don't know. And then, I wanted to join Target magazine. But also the other influences at that time were these 3 Indian writers who burst upon the scene. Maybe in my late teens, early 20s is when it happened. Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie was there a little earlier, but I was too young to read him. Amitav Ghosh and Vikram Seth. And my God, for anybody who wanted to be a writer, I think they really freed our imaginations, allowed us to write in an Indian way, about Indian things without putting asterisks and putting footnotes. And Salman Rushdie particularly, he just freed English from the shackles. He said, I'll write how I want, chutneyfied English. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, you find out.
Yes.
I'm not going to make it easier for you or put, footnotes there. So that kind of confidence that it gave Indian writers, I think a whole generation of writers who could just write English as they spoke it. Then, of course, I finished 12th and I wanted to do literature, but again, South Indian middle class family, there are only two professions, medicine or engineering. Especially if your marks are good enough to get into either of them, then you will have to do that.
And yours were?
Yeah, I was like front bencher. Good student. So, of course, I did engineering because I didn't want to do medicine. And at least that was very clear. So, did engineering.
So, you had to do engineering. Was it like that?
Yes. Okay. You had to do. Because you did your CET, you got a seat, and how can you reject an engineering seat kind of thing?
Yeah.
And my mom also did this whole number on me where she said, I want my daughters to be financially independent and never depend on any man. And so that was compelling.
That's a great argument.
That's a great argument.
You couldn't agree more.
Yeah. That's true, and I know that to be true now. After 30 years of being a writer, I know that I could have earned so much more as an engineer.
Oh, is it?
Oh, please. Yeah. So, but it's not the life I wanted. Anyway, I finished my engineering, and then there was a rush to just please finish it in 4 years. Don't extend it, so that, because the deal was after you do engineering, you do whatever you want.
So you just give that degree to your parents, and it's like, okay, now I'm free.
I mean, I think they thought that I would have come to my senses.
Yeah.
Walked into Target magazine without ever having written to them before or anything, expecting some big establishment. Nothing. I think it was like a toilet block converted into an office. In Connaught Place, tiny long office with only 3 writers, and writers never left Target magazine. They never quit. People didn't quit. I don't know. In those days, it also nobody switched jobs so easily. Right. But for some reason, the week before I just walked into that office, one of the writers had left because she was an army wife and she had decided, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to go live wherever my husband is. I'm going to accompany him. And there was a vacancy. And then they, of course, did their interviews and all that. But I got the job. So, and I did not realize then what an important thing that would be for my career as a writer. Because my first editor there, Vatsala Kaul Banerjee, continues to be my editor, even for the latest book. So 32 years I have worked with her, and we've done so many books together, and she taught me everything I know about children's writing. I mean, I had some ideas, but I needed her to mentor me completely. So, and then, of course, later I went to the UK and realized that it wasn't always sunny there, as it is in Enid Blyton books. In fact, for months on end, there was no sun. Scones were okay, and then, more importantly, British food was rubbish, of course, but also most of it. I mean, for somebody coming from India, it was so bland and not fun, especially if you're vegetarian. What will you eat? Yeah. But now, of course, it's quite exciting and everything, I'm sure. But and the other thing I realized was that all those children were roaming around unsupervised and going to boarding schools and things like that because Enid Blyton experienced World War II. And in those days, London was a big target, always in danger of being bombed. So children were sent away to the countryside to be safe while parents went to war, or mothers worked as nurses, or, rolling up bandages, tending to wounded soldiers, things like that. So it must have been a very traumatic time. Those relatives in the country did not necessarily want them, but they had to take care of them. And that's why those children were given cold suppers, given tins and say, you do what you like, just make yourself scarce, And they had to, I think Enid Blyton, because she must have been a very imaginative child, imagined all these kinds of scenarios. Oh, there is a smuggler, that, I don't know if she herself, I don't know when she was born, I can't remember, but she has certainly lived through the World War. And so then when you put that complexion on it, and you're like, my God, I have such a blessed childhood here. Right. No conflict, nothing, surrounded by adults who love you, willing to wake up early on a picnic day to make you a warm meal, fresh meal to carry. So again, so it's just the power of storytelling. Unless you know your own and you're confident about who you are, it's so easy to get swept away in other people's narratives. Yeah. Not always, storytelling wise, she taught me everything. But
and would you say that she kind of therefore cushioned a whole generation or a few generations?
Yeah, I think.
Of children?
Of children, yeah, for sure. And made it as if they'd had even boarding school stories,
Yeah, she made it sound so exciting
that I was constantly telling my
Mallory
parents,
Towers.
may I please go to boarding? Why why can I not go to boarding?
Yeah.
And then I realized that boarding school itself is a very British trope in British books. Even Harry Potter, at its heart, is a boarding school story.
Yes.
Narnia is a story about being sent away to the countryside and being so bored and not knowing what to do that you open a cupboard and then there is, an entire universe out there. So they always have sort of the same tropes, and I think the boarding school trope came from your parents being all over the world ruling. And, in India at least, they were sent back home by the time they were 5. The kids were born here, but they would be sent back to school to
be educated.
To be educated. And it must have been, again, severely traumatic to be so far away from your parents.
Wow.
And if you read Roald Dahl's autobiography, Boy, about being in a British boarding school, it was horrible, he says. It was so cold and, of course, no central heating or anything. And the new recruits, the new children would have to go and warm up the lavatories, sit on the lavatory in the icy cold so that the seniors could come and find a warm seat.
Oh God.
Yeah, so it wasn't all that fun. And here we are in this lovely Bangalore, beautiful weather all the time, no conflict since the time of Tipu Sultan, no tsunami, no river to flood.
I mean, we do have our own problems in the
now,
sense that we don't have roads to start with, but I know the weather is great.
Yeah, no, in the 70s, it was a great place to grow up. It was beautiful. I mean, I don't think we've ever had no problems at all, but it was idyllic, really.
And, but coming back to Roald Dahl, because you mentioned him, and my son has grown up on his books, and thanks to my son, I have read and reread things like BFG and, so many others. And I love how Roald Dahl kind of pushed those boundaries of what is appropriate to tell a kid and what isn't, and then kind of, so he brings in these really super mean characters who just mean because they're mean. They're not, it's not like they have a nice side. And I think that has influenced, like at least one generation or more generations of children to understand life very differently. I think us reading Enid Blyton when we were growing up, there was still, and if I remember right, Roopa, there was still a sense of there's a good guy, there's a not so good guy, though everybody's fairly mild. But in a Roald Dahl, I think that just gets really beautifully mixed up. It kind of gets closer to what life is like.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and in Indian storytelling, it goes one better. The good guy, because in Roald Dahl, the bad people are really, really mean, like, and
oh my God.
And then ugly. He talks about
like Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spike.
Yeah. But in Indian stories, there's not even that boundary. The good people can become bad in certain circumstances. The bad people can become elevated to the level of gods. It's a constant. Asuras do something. They do tapas. They meditate. They get boons from the gods. And then they misuse those boons, and therefore they have to come back. Devas get too arrogant, and they get punished. So it's very shifting, constantly shifting. So the notion of what is good and what is bad becomes blurred in Indian storytelling, which is great because it allows that much flexibility and that much openness to what is good and what is bad, and circumstances decide it. And basically you're good or bad not because you're evil or excellent, but because of the choices you make. And that is very empowering in a story, to know that it's in your hands. You're not born good or born bad. It's about what choice you make in every moment that decides. So it throws the ball right back into your court. And then you have to decide. So it's very empowering to think that you can make your own destiny. If you're not a witch, means you cannot be good. There isn't such a thing. You can be whoever you want to be.
And I think you've brought some of that into your series. So I think maybe you started with Taranauts.
Yeah, I did.
And there, you just mentioned witches, and I think you have done away with witches and wizards, but instead you've brought in Garudas and Gandaberundas and characters that we see and we relate to as we're growing up as Indian children in India. So what was it that made you write something like Taranauts to start with? And then how was it received by children?
Taranauts was being Enid Blyton in my mind. You know, I wanted to write those kind of stories always. Lots of adventure and maybe, but because of my science background, I wanted to be more sci-fi kind of thing, rooted in some kind of science, perhaps. So Taranauts began with Vatsala coming back into my life. 10 years I'd been away. I'd lived in London and Bombay, Delhi, all kinds of places. Come back to Bangalore, and that's when Vatsala got back in touch with me and said, "Hey, I've just taken over at Hachette as publishing director of children's books. It's a new company that's just come into India. I mean, an old company, but come into India recently. And I was looking to commission some books for children, and I read something you wrote for a magazine recently, and I love that tone, and I want you to write." So, and she started off saying, "Let's do a series." Okay, so I said, okay, and I had this kind of, Enid Blyton's magic faraway tree, where they climb up to the top of the faraway tree, and every time it's a different world has come by on a cloud or something. So that kind of idea, so children from India go somewhere to a different world, they solve a problem there, and then they come back and apply it here, the solution, and they find that it works. Something, it started like that.
Right.
And then Vatsala said, "But what will these children call their mothers, for instance?" I said, "What?" So she said, would they call them Amma or Ammi or Mummy or Ai, or because whatever they call their mothers would set the books
part of India
which part of India. So then that's already sort of creating divisions where none need to exist.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, okay, that's a good point." So then that's when I decided I would set it in a parallel universe, which would echo India. In so many ways, but it would not be India. That gave me so much more freedom. I could just do what I wanted. I didn't have to think about Indian situations. They could do whatever they wanted.
So what do they call their moms?
Oh, nothing. I never had them call their moms, I think. Or maybe mom or something, because it was an English book. I can't even remember what they did. So again, parents featured very little. Because, it was on the Enid Blyton kind of format.
Of course, yes.
Parents came in here and there, but very seldom. It was more about the children and their mentors and, and the big bad, misguided twin brother of the good guy. So all of that. So it was fun. And and actually the inspiration for these 8 books of Taranauts and came from my visit to the Belur Halibi temples. So I used to go often, and we started taking children there as well, because as part of our company Bangalore Walks, we do history and heritage walks for children. So some of the school tours would be to Belur and Halibi. And one of the lovely things in the ceilings of many old temples is this compass, which shows north, south, east, west directions, but not with there are no words. There are guardians of each of the 8 directions. So from looking at them and identifying the guardians, you know which way is what.
Wow.
Okay, so that was very compelling. And I said, okay, so I create this series where there are 8 worlds, and they're in different directions, placed in each of the cardinal directions, and they'll each have guardians. So they are called Ashtadikpalakas, right? The 8 directions ka lords, guardians of the. But if you say Ashtadikpalakas, an urban Indian child whose primary language is English would say, what is that?
You've lost them.
Yeah, you lost them. So you say guardians of the 8 directions, and suddenly it sounds cooler. So that was the whole Taranauts thing, to make Indian what is Indian, disguise it with words and fun, and actually present India to them and Indian philosophy to them in a different, fun, Western kind of format.
And then how did you blend it? So did you keep the names of these 8 guardians, and then what they do in your books, is it essentially what they do in our texts?
No, not at all. In fact, the 8 guardians have no names. They're just called, but I sort of invented a kind of language called Tara tongue, which people on the universe was called Mithya.
Right.
And the super son of Mithya was called Tara. Okay, so that's why Taranauts, So from the very title of the series, they are mixed words. There is partly an Indian language word and an English word.
Yeah.
So like these children, the Taranauts, they move between worlds. And that's so like astronauts. And therefore Taranauts, okay, things like that. So this new language that I invented, and the names of the people. The three Taranauts, for instance, are called Zvala, Zarpa, and Tufan. And Zwala's spirit parent, and it was about not that you're given some superpowers, but that you discover your potential. You always had it, you didn't know it, and then, you hear that you have this spirit parent and you have those gifts. You just have to find them. So Zwala's spirit parent was fire. And anybody who reads a little laterally would realize that Zvala is actually Jwala.
Right.
But to a child reading it, that they don't realize it at all. Zvala is some Z word, very cool name, exotic from some other planet,
Yeah.
And then Zarpa, her spirit parent, her big skill is that she can move very fast.
Got it.
And she has a lisp. So in the ordinary world, in her school, she's considered a bit of and she runs really, she's a tomboy, very sporty and everything, but she always ends up getting disqualified in running races because towards the end she cuts lanes because she starts moving like this. So with all these clues, you realize, and then we tell that the spirit parent is She Shah, who's the super serpent. And so Zarpa is actually Sarpa.
Yeah.
So I was having myself a great deal of fun, but what really made me happy is that children really enjoyed those books. And in the end, after 8 books came out, it was just an experiment. We thought we'll do 4 and see if children are taking to it. Then we extend the contract to 4 more books. Otherwise, we might have to drop it.
Yeah.
But it went through to 8 books. It became the first ever Indian fantasy adventure series in English for children. And last year, it celebrated its 15th anniversary. I have met children and who were not born when the books were written, who are enjoying it as
Who've
much.
grown up with it.
Who are now reading it and still finding it amazing. And the other thing that happened was it became sort of, for me, I don't know if it's the first, I don't want to claim anything, but I used to get letters from Indian mums who were living abroad, who said, I bring back so many Indian books for my children, but this is the first series by the Indian author that they've connected with so deeply. It feels like it's in the model is like a Western story. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there is something deeper in it which they just love. So I was like, okay. That was not at all my intention, but my intention was definitely to mine our own mythology for creatures and beings and a worldview and everything, and not just take dragons and goblins and which are wonderful to read about in their own context, but we should create our own.
Yeah, and it's about time someone did that, right, Roopa?
Yeah, I think so. And
so have you set off that trend? Would you say, I don't know, maybe you won't take credit for it, but do you think you've set off that trend where a lot of people are doing it now, a lot more people? And I can imagine that collaboration between you and Priya Kurian, who of course is an amazing artist and illustrator. She's the one who introduced us and brought us together.
Yes.
And is kind of super prolific and just, I think her art and her work can just take that text and elevate it to another level where people can visualize what you're trying to say and then some,
Absolutely.
So I can imagine that collaboration and being on the right bandwidth with the right artist would have meant a lot to you as well.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you have put all of this work out there. You've kind of started off a lot of these trends, I suspect, to a large degree. But then, over and above that, how little credit you seem to claim for it, and kind of how humble you are about this whole thing. It's
there are no new, it's just how I have synthesized the millions of ideas that have been gifted to me by other writers, other thinkers.
See, there you go.
No,
I think I just proved my point.
No, it's true. I don't think any of us can take really so much credit. It takes a village. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. All this is very true. It's not just a cliche.
Yeah.
We are made of what we have read and the people we have met and how we've been nurtured through our lives. And our point of view, our POV comes from that. So you can't. And the Upanishads say it very clearly. There are beautiful stories in the Upanishads that tell you that, hello,
Yeah.
you please don't take high. And that's
You're a medium.
Yes, absolutely. You're a channel, and it's beautiful how differently the same information is channeled through different people and comes out. So instead of getting upset that somebody's talking about the same thing differently from you, I think it's such a wonder that, wow, I wonder what your life was like that it came out through you like this, and how interesting. a different perspective. Because we are really, our understanding of the world is made not just from our perspective, but the more perspectives we are willing to be open to, our understanding of the world becomes larger and larger and more inclusive and more 360 degrees. Otherwise, it's a very, we are very limited beings. We see such a small shard of life as it is, and then we are so attached to that worldview that we're willing to fight for it, without realizing that it's just a very small fraction of the truth as it is, and the only way to understand the truth really, or understand a slightly larger fraction of the truth, is to allow other opinions to come in.
So the fact that you're, sitting here today and saying what you just said, do you think it has anything to do with the fact that you also wrote a book about the Bhagavad Gita for children, and then of course that became a series? Did that change you in some way?
Oh, completely. That was the most unexpected thing even to myself that I ever did in my life. Yeah, because
so it started with the Bhagavad Gita book.
Yeah, the Gita for Children, that came out in 2015. In 2013, I just finished writing a book on popular science called What If the Earth Stopped Spinning and 24 Other Mysteries of Science. I had finished Taranauts by then. That's all I had written. 8 books of Taranauts, and then some small picture books for children and stuff. So even by the end of 2013, if you had said your next book is going to be on the Bhagavad Gita for children, I really would have laughed and absolutely said, are you nuts? Definitely not. I mean, I never saw myself as an interpreter of scripture for children at all.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a family, we are Lingayats, which is a sort of a Protestant kind of approach to Hinduism itself. It's like to Vedic Hinduism. So it's not Brahmanical at all. It's a more equal kind of, at least the prophet, I'm not prophet, our teacher, the person who founded it, Basavanna. Yeah, Basavanna, he saw it that way, a more egalitarian society where So I come from that kind of upbringing. And she said, maybe you should write the Bhagavad Gita for children. I was like, what? Yeah. Of all the things, like, why would you ask me to do that? Am I not this fun children's author who writes the fun stuff? And it wasn't even as if Taranauts had done badly or anything.
Right.
Why would you want me to do this? And there was a lot of fear because, I mean, first of all, there were a lot of preconceived notions that the Gita is about death. It's meant for people after post-retirement kind of reading. And it's too complex. Yeah. It's definitely not for children. And it's in Sanskrit, and I had never studied Sanskrit. So on many levels, and it, unlike Rick Riordan's Greek gods, who we can take from Mount Olympus and put on top of Empire State Building and say they live here now, the Gita was not, he can do that because the Greek gods are not worshipped anymore. But here, the Gita is a living, breathing text, very, very dear to a lot of people. Yeah. So you can't take all kinds of creative liberties with it. You have to do and anyone I had ever met who had studied the Gita said, like, after years, and the first layer, maybe, so many layers, and they never stop going for Gita class. And so it's not as if now I've understood the Gita. So I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? And so I resisted very staunchly for very long. And then Vatsala came back to me after 6 months or something and said, listen, are you going to do it or not? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So she said, have you read it? Is that how you come to this decision that it's not meant for children? And then I had to sheepishly admit that, no, I have not read it actually. And she says, where do all these notions come from? Don't you think it's fair that you at least read it once and then you decide if... And I said, if it's patriarchal or casteist or sexist, and I'm not going to write it. I don't think children should be... She said, fine, just read it. And then I went to an aunt who was... her name is Tarakini, who was deeply into the Gita and philosophy like that. But she was also the school aunt. So I said, okay, at least she won't give me the very, I don't know what religious version of it. She will just tell me what it's about.
Yeah.
And after one conversation with her, where she just happened to mention that, Arjuna and Krishna are best friends, which was something I had never realized. I always thought of them as mentor and mentee, or like God and human or something. But when she said they were best friends, something clicked. And I said, so basically the Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between two best friends. It's a little problematic that one of them is asking the other one to stand up and kill his family. But but essentially it's that it gives me a sort of into the book. How will I talk to children about it? It's a conversation between two friends.
Right.
It's a more profound conversation perhaps than you would normally have with your friends, but it's still a conversation between friends. And then she gave me her favorite commentaries. She said, you read for a while, and then maybe 15, 20 days later, we can meet again and talk about the other chapters. We had only spoken about the first and part of the second or something. So I took the commentaries away. I began to read, and Kadambari, I was just riveted. I was bewitched. I was like, this is such amazing wisdom, and it is so secular. It's set in a story of, warring cousins and all that, but that is just part of the context of it. But if you actually go to what it's saying, just timeless, universal lessons that go past any boundaries of race or gender or geography, culture. It doesn't matter. These are just truths. And to me, by the time I had finished reading it, it felt like the ultimate self-help book for life. And I said, how much children will benefit if they get this into their system, these wisdoms, early on. So then my challenge became, how will I write it in a way that children will be able to enjoy it, access it?
Yeah.
So to keep the language, so that was a process. But once I had decided how I was going to do it, just flowed. And the writing of it really was transformational for me in many levels. It just helped me look at the world differently, understand that many of the things that I had instinctively always believed, but which the world told me was not the way to look at things, were actually approved by Krishna, which suddenly made me feel very validated and seen.
So what were some of these things?
Oh, some of it was that that you don't have to be in competition, because it's always in the world that I grew up in, and I don't think that's changed at all. It's always about one-upping somebody else. You come first in class, you get this job, you earn more, then you are a success, kind of thing. And in the Gita, unequivocally, he says, you just focus on the next step. In every step, in every moment, do the best you can. That's all that's within your control. There's no need to think about look at others and see where they are and whether I'm doing better than them. That's not the point of life. The point is to be a better person in every moment than you were the previous moment. And that just means mindful action. And I'm not even going to tell you that it's that this is right and this is wrong. You have to decide based on the circumstance, based on who you are, what your dharma or duty is in that moment. That is up to you to decide. So it's again a huge responsibility. It's very liberating that there are no rules, but it's also very terrifying because ultimately you're on your own.
Yeah.
And you have to decide in this moment. But you also realize that if you're only cultivate mindfulness, that I will think about this action, how it will affect others before I let my emotions take over and I do something stupid, impulsive, that will hurt a lot of people and myself. If you are mindful like that in every moment, it will turn out that you will do some considered action, and that will usually, it may not, the consequences may be anything. We can't predict the consequences of our actions. But within the limited universe of what we can predict, we will be doing something that, at least by our conscience, seems right in that moment. You have thought about it before you do it. And that makes it righter than it would have been if you didn't think about it. So it's just that kind of just basic rules.
Yeah.
And I've always hated being in competition with anybody else. But it seemed something that one had to do. And this sort of freed me. I said, yeah, fine. Okay, Krishna, I'll just do what you say. Thank you.
Yeah. Did it feel like a big responsibility to be
Oh,
writing
my
this
God.
for children?
Absolutely. Impressionable young minds.
Yeah.
You tell them.
How did you get around to doing that?
So, I don't know. It was just like, I really felt like I got this. I know how to write this. At some point, as a writer or an artist or whatever, you have to find that conviction within yourself. Nobody's going to validate you. You have to say that at this point, this is what I feel is right and I'm doing it. And I always had Vatsala as my sounding board, my editor. She's also a great mentor and a good friend who will catch any biases that happen to creep in.
Yeah.
Even the good biases, like even if I say hard work is a good thing, she'll say, well, you don't want to thrust that down. You have to always leave it open for the reader to interpret. You can say that somebody worked like this and this happened, and it's up to them to understand that maybe that leads to that. But you can't say whoever works hard is a good person, or they will get the rewards. And the Gita is very ambivalent about that also, that, you don't know. You can work as hard as you like and you may not get what you are expecting. And that's why leave the goal.
Yes.
Make a goal for yourself, but don't focus on the goal, focus on the next step. Because even if you don't get to that goal, you would have enriched yourself so much along the journey that it won't matter anymore. So that kind of living, it was a huge responsibility. I was quite terrified, but that fear was not there when I was writing. After I had finished writing, and the book had pressed send on the manuscript, and it was then going in, then it was a bit like, oh my God, I hope I did the right thing. Because you don't know how it will be, for a writer or an artist of any kind. You can only write something or paint something, and then once you send your work out into the world, it's no longer yours. It is the readers, it's the viewers. And how people react to it is I cannot predict and I cannot control. So I didn't know what would happen.
But that's exactly what the Gita had already told you, right? Like, just do your work and then leave the consequences.
Yes, so it helped me, but I was still like, you are human, so you're wondering, oh God, what if everybody just hates it, or they find that it's completely wrongly interpreted, or, they don't agree with it, doesn't sit well, and, what if they throw stones at my house, who knows? Because these are all very real possibilities in India, because people feel so close to the Gita.
It can be quite polarizing.
It can be polarizing and all that. Of course, we'd had it read by an expert before that, Bibek Debroy.
Wow.
So I knew that at least he thought it was fine, the interpretation. But who knows, the larger public. But it was just, Kadambari was just accepted and loved so much. And it's been the making of me as a writer, in the sense that this is also important, right, in the world, when you live in the world. Recognition, something that helps you continue to do the work you do, is like encouragement, some kind of acknowledgement that you're a writer, some kind of recognition of your name and the kinds of books you do. That all of that came to me with this one book. And then after I finished it, after it was, the reception was so good, everybody loved it, and everybody said, people of my generation, my friends, thank God you've written something called the Gita for children. Maybe I will be able to understand something now.
This is what I'm reading right now. We're going to talk about it next.
So that, I think our generation, my generation, who grew up in the 70s and 80s, a lot of us who lived in urban India and were still in this, thinking, dreaming in English, that hasn't changed. I still think and dream in English. It was a way of connecting with something very Indian that had passed us by, that wasn't part of our growing up years for a lot of us. And if it was part of our growing up years, it was presented as a religious text. Okay, the Gita says this, Gita is pedestalized, and not like a book not a work of great literary and philosophical merit, but a thing of something to bow your head to and to be respectful towards.
Right.
And this made it, available, accessible to everyone. And suddenly people were like, I didn't even know the Gita said this. This is great. Thank you. So
you demystified it. You removed that distance between.
I just removed the distance. And I did that by storifying it, I think. Yeah, because most other Gitas will have shloka by shloka interpretations.
Yes.
Which is good for a serious serious seeker. But you have to first feel warmly towards a text to want to seriously seek what it says, unless you're so inclined from the beginning. And the Gita's wisdoms are too precious to not allow them to be accessed by everyone. So my Gita for children is just meant to spark the interest. After that, whether you go deeper into it or not is your choice. But to take away that intimidation, that fear, that feeling of impostership, that I don't know what the Gita is. No, this is what the Gita is about, actually. And now you can, if you wish to, you can go further into it. But even what is there in the Gita for children itself is enough to already enhance your life. Just the few things that I've taken and put into it. And because it was this book that sort of made me a well-known name, that's why also is part of the reason why I will never take credit because it's an old 2,500 years old at least. I have only, for some reason beyond my understanding, I have been chosen as a channel to interpret it. So I'm just very grateful, and I cannot take credit for a single word in it.
Yeah, no, I completely hear you. I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate also, because it's partially my job to do that. But I completely hear you, that some things are meant to flow through you, and therefore this one did.
Yeah, and the Gita says, don't think of yourself as the doer.
Exactly.
That's all. You just because of your nature and because of who you are, things flow through you, and do them to the best of your ability. Don't think of yourself as the doer.
Yeah. And then how did this become a series? Because I know you wrote the Yoga Sutras, and then there's the Vedas and Upanishads, and who knows what's next also, right?
Yeah. I didn't want it to become a series or anything. I was like, okay, the Gita for children is done. Now I want to write other stuff, fun stuff. And my editor, Vatsala, was like, okay, now it's done well. Let's do Vedas and Upanishads. And I'm like, please stop. I'm not going to be that kind of writer. I have so many other hills I want to die on, I want to climb. I don't want to do. So she's like, again, very wisely said, this time she's very wise. She said, okay, you do whatever else you want.
Oops.
Yeah. Which I did. I wrote a book on economics, which I had never studied in school. Yeah. Which also became one of those sleeper hits and did very well.
Economics for children?
For children, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. When I was researching the Gita, I knew that the Gita is a distillation of the wisdoms of the Upanishads. And this distillation clearly has been done by Vedavyasa or whoever wrote the Mahabharata. So I was like, I wonder what he left out. Then that authorly curiosity also comes in. So this is what he has distilled and put into the Gita. I wonder what else the Upanishads say. What did he leave out? What did he not think was so important? Maybe it resonates with me.
Right.
Maybe. So that's when I went back to Vatsala and said, okay, now I'm ready to try. And I would like to write the Vedas and Upanishads for children. And then went off down that rabbit hole. Loved it. Very different approach to the Gita, though. They didn't speak to me at all. The Upanishads were very hard. I read and read and read tomes and tomes, and it was just not, I was not getting it was not sitting in my head.
It's funny you say that, because when I'm reading this book, and I'm reading it along with my son, we're sort of borrowing it from each other and reading it parallelly.
How nice.
I actually find this book is so illuminating. It's so simplified. It's so demystified. It even tells you things like, why did they make havans in certain shapes? Why did they take a square and then break that up into multiple shapes and make the falcon, and what was the relevance of that?
That's your design background also. I think that must be really
maybe
fun for you.
But also, how did they remember the Vedas? And how did they check through the generations and millennia, literally, that they were remembering it correctly? And then all these different meters and the
amazing,
fact that, the fact that you have just kind of put all of these things down, I think has opened up a whole world, which to me was pretty opaque. Because if I had picked up one of the Vedas and, like you said, read a translation and a transliteration, very little would have maybe made its way to somebody like me.
Actually, the Vedas are such a big, I think about almost a third of the book is just setting the context for Vedic times. What were they? Who were the gods? Who were the people? Within, because everything has to be studied within that particular context. It makes sense then. Otherwise, it's like totally removed from context. It doesn't resonate.
And the fact that you've said 3,000 years ago, deep inside the forests of India, a great thought revolution was brewing. And you've actually called it out as that, and then taken it from there and said, why did they think the way that they thought?
It's simply about ideas. Everything is an idea, right? It starts as an idea. So how you view the world is your idea of how the world works. And all of those ideas are meant to help you make sense of your existence, and to help you pass your time on this earth, your limited time, in a way that makes you keeps you at peace. Because the world is crazy, the world is chaotic. So all of this are ways to help you navigate this chaotic ocean called life. And because we are Indian, I feel, and because these things are so alive around us, all these ideas, they're not actually only in the scriptures, or they're not, because they are presented to us in the form of our classical dances. The same ideas are there in our stories, mythological, Puranic stories, that same ideas are carved out on temples. So where in our films, contemporary films is the same idea. We are still mining the Ramayana and the Mahabharata for stories because it's so comprehensive, these texts and these wisdoms, that you can't escape from them. So as Indians, we are already exposed to this worldview a lot, even though we don't know it. Even in language, the kind of phrases that we use that recall something from an older time. So because you can't escape from it, when you read it, suddenly it's more like pennies dropping, more than trying to access a whole new landscape that you know nothing about.
So you're saying it's already there, and it's already part of all of us in our lives. It's already part of
us. Yes, I think so. At least it was for me and for a lot of people I know. They're like, that's why. So it just like So a lot of aha moments when you.
And I love how you also kind of bring it back to our lives today, and something that a 10-year, 12-year-old, 13-year-old can relate to. It's just kind of so simple that I can imagine those aha moments going off in the minds of like teenagers or kids, or
Thank you.
And I have like a one bit that I wanted to read out. It's like a very short paragraph where, and I love this, so my son helped me to select it.
Nice. He's 11, is he?
He's 11. Yeah. So it says, when you're talking about reality and consciousness, right, something as profound as that. The world is only as real as Netflix. Because all your organs of perception, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin, are turned towards and consume the world outside, and because that world is so bright and beautiful and tempting and demanding, you are tricked into believing that it is the real thing, only that it is the only thing there is. When really it is no more than Netflix, a make-believe world your mind has created for its entertainment and then been sucked into.
Right. I can't even remember writing that, but if it's there, it's there.
I loved it. I loved how it's so simple and it's so profound at the same time.
But it's true, right? Everybody's universe is different because we construct the universe in our heads. And we suffer because of the universe we have constructed. And in fact, if you used your mind to change that universe, you could be happier. It's really how you construct the universe, that if you see yourself as a victim and this, then it becomes that. They're all self-fulfilling, these.
Yeah.
But you are the maker of your universe. You have the power to change it.
And coming back to Netflix, that's the algorithm that you feed into, and then the algorithm feeds it back into you. So you can choose what algorithm that is.
It's difficult to break out of the algorithm for sure, But it's very possible. It's very possible. And it's really, it's your choice. Again, it all comes down to choice. I mean, a lot of people would find that, like, what do you mean people are in such terrible circumstances? How can they fight it? But Indian philosophy tells us that your spirit is invincible. Maybe your body, maybe your intellect, all that is being assaulted by stuff. But the true you is invincible. And you can use, if you believe that, it will begin to come true. You will have to believe that nothing can harm you. And I mean, all of us know people in terrible circumstances, people who are, have suffered terrible accidents, how they come out of it, how they become inspirations for other people. So that power is there. It's how you see yourself. You have to change your perception. I truly believe in that. Yeah.
I guess it's very, very anti-defeatist also.
Yes, very, yeah.
Gives you a lot of
agency.
And
also it depends, what do you mean by defeat? How do you define defeat? If you think defeat is not being able to do what somebody else is doing, then of course you might find yourself, everybody will find themselves wanting. Yeah. Even the richest person in the world will want to be that fisherman on the beach. There's always something else that is very appealing. But if you just take, if you don't compare with what others are doing, but what can I do? I think that's a very powerful thing.
So Roopa, close to kind of wrapping up this amazing conversation. And I think it's actually going to take another podcast to unfold some of the things that you've said and explored in your books. But for now, I want to ask you about mentors. And you've mentioned this lady Vatsala a lot. You've actually also mentioned Krishna. what is mentorship been for you in your life? What has it done for you?
I mean, it's just, again, helped me discover my own potential. A mentor sees in you capabilities that you didn't know existed. So Vatsala, for one, for sure, I don't know why she thought I was the right person to write this book when I didn't believe it at all. But she said to me once that, I think you have the ability to break down difficult concepts for children in a way that they will understand. And it doesn't matter what the subject is. If whatever the subject, you take a difficult concept, you understand it, and then you break it down. So because of her belief in me, I took it up and I managed to do it. So I think that's what mentors do. And actually, although I might have mentioned Vatsala and Krishna, everybody I meet is a mentor in some way. Even my dog, such a huge mentor for how to live your life. Just live in the moment. The past is an illusion. The future is an illusion. All you have is this moment. Enjoy it. And when she sleeps so peacefully. When she's hungry, she's like, just give me my food right now. And the moment she's fed, there is no, but you didn't feed me for 2 hours before I was hungry. Nothing. The past is gone. Just now, in this moment, I'm fed and happy, and I just want to lie in your lap. So and there are enough people who can be mentors who tell you what not to do. That is also mentorship in a way.
Yeah.
When you see people behaving a certain way and suffering for it, that's a lesson, that don't do that. And then the whole philosophy tells you that there is no such thing as success and failure. Duality, the way we see the world as black and white, is a mistake according to all our texts, that we should let that veil of ignorance drop, and then you'll see everything is the same thing. It's just different sides of the same thing. So if you don't, censure yourself for when you feel that I am a failure, or praise yourself when you become a success, what you can then begin to see each of these experiences are as just experiences. Success is an experience, failure is an experience, and from each you learn something and move on. How am I becoming a better person? By having this experience.
Yeah.
If you can look at it like that, life would be so fantastic, and you would be at peace,
So if there was that one woman who you would say has been your inspiration, and I think I already know what the answer is, but I'm going to ask you regardless, who would that woman be?
As a writer,
Yeah.
as a writer for children, definitely Enid Blyton, definitely. Yeah, I mean, Salman Rushdie came later, but again, he's not a children's writer. So Enid Blyton, 700 books for children, each of them. I cannot remember an Enid Blyton book that I left halfway. What they call DNF nowadays.
What
Did
is that?
not finish.
Okay.
So I have not DNF'd any Enid Blyton book at all. I have. And she really lit up my childhood. So, yeah, I think Enid Blyton.
So why do you think it is that, I don't know, when you mention Enid Blyton, of course I've read her as a child and all of that, but I had never seen her pictures or seen her represented anywhere
Absolutely,
as
you're
anything
so right.
other than just that signature, very
which is on the book, which is a printed
recognizable signature of hers.
Yeah.
But as a person, what was her life like? Why did she do the things that she did?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea?
So, it's funny that you should ask that, because I'm usually a person who will immediately go to, if I'm anything that I'm wondering about, go to Google, do the search, fall down those rabbit holes, read and read and read about that person and the context. I have never done that for Enid Blyton myself. She's just been in this hallowed, kind of sunny kind of space in my head, and I don't want to know. Actually, I don't want to know anything about her. But when I went to live in England for a bit, that's when I was like, okay, now can do pilgrimage. Go to the sites. Where was she live? Where did she live? What's an Enid Blyton museum? There wasn't anything. There's
don't
nothing.
exist.
And imagine, she died, I think, in 1973 or something, early 70s. And 50 years later, children in India and across the world who read English are still enjoying, loving her books.
Yeah.
And there is no monument to her. For a long time, she was considered very politically incorrect in a new age because of, I think she had gollywogs in the nursery, and the gollywogs looked a lot like black Africans. So it seemed to be a parody, a caricature of the black African. And the Gollywog, I can't remember it like that, but was always the bad guy or the naughty person or something. So the thing is, all these things just don't matter to a child, is what I've realized from my basing it on my own experience. It didn't. I never thought of Africans as gollywogs. I didn't. It didn't change my. In fact, she taught me to love everybody, and unless they were doing something wrong. So I don't know why she's not as celebrated in her own country.
Interesting.
Yeah, she's become a sort of a hot potato. Yeah, you can't really say that her writing is supposed to be very twee and very basic and all these things. But in my mind, and she said in an interview once that I don't care for the opinion of any critic above the age of 12. And by that benchmark, by that metric, she has succeeded and won over the hearts of millions of children across, again, erased the boundaries of geography, of culture, everything. Everybody loves her books, but the people above 12 don't think that she's worthy of being, celebrated. So it hasn't been.
So as you know, what we're going to do is kind of transform you into Enid Blyton. So are you ready for that?
I'm not, but
yeah, let's give it a shot.
Let's give it a shot.
But Roopa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was so comfortable. I really enjoyed talking to you, Kadambari. It made me feel very much at home, and I could just speak my thoughts. And thank you for a very lovely conversation.